when billionaire real estate mogul Michael Donovan's 17-year-old daughter was crushed by falling scaffolding at one of his own construction sites. Doctors delivered the devastating verdict: she would never walk again. For 3 months, he watched his brilliant, dance-loving Lily waste away in a wheelchair, drowning in guilt that no amount of money could wash clean. But on a rain-soaked Manhattan night, something impossible happened that would shatter everything he thought he knew about justice, miracles, and the true cost of redemption. A mysterious child appeared in his bulletproof limousine, soaking wet, barefoot, with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages. Her words would haunt him forever. "I can make your daughter walk again, but you'll have to choose between her and me." How did she know intimate details about his family that no stranger could possibly know? Why did her touch seem to awaken sensation in Lily's paralyzed legs? And what terrible price would this impossible miracle demand from a man who had built his empire on the graves of the innocent? What Michael discovered about this enigmatic girl's identity would force him to confront the darkest chapter of his past. A chapter written in blood, buried in legal documents, and paid for with the life of someone he had forgotten until it was almost too late. Some debts can only be settled with the complete destruction of everything you've built on lies. Some miracles can only be earned through the courage to face the monsters you've created. Don't forget to follow our channel for more incredible stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Hit that like button if this story grabbed your attention, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from around the world. The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the black Bentley like angry fists demanding entry. Manhattan's neon lights blurred into watercolor streaks as the luxury sedan crawled through the congested arteries of Fifth Avenue. Inside, Michael Donovan pressed his manicured fingers against his temples, feeling the familiar throb of a headache that no amount of Advil could touch. At 52, Michael had everything the American dream promised: a real estate empire worth $800 million, penthouse apartments in Manhattan and the Hamptons, and enough political connections to have the mayor on speed dial. But tonight, as he stared at his reflection in the rain-soaked window, all he could see was the hollow shell of a man who had traded his soul for success and lost the only thing that truly mattered. 3 months. It had been exactly 3 months since the accident that shattered his world into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. 3 months since his 17-year-old daughter Lily, his brilliant, vibrant Lily, who dreamed of becoming a dancer at Juilliard, had been crushed under the weight of his own ambitions. The irony wasn't lost on him. The construction site where she was struck by falling debris belonged to him. Donovan Development Group. His legacy had literally crippled his child. The doctors at Mount Sinai had been brutally honest. Spinal cord injury, complete severance at the T12 level. The words echoed in his mind like a death sentence: "She'll never walk again." "Mr. Donovan, I'm sorry." Michael's phone buzzed incessantly on the leather seat beside him. Text messages from his assistant about tomorrow's board meeting. Emails from contractors. Calls from investors. The machine of capitalism never stopped grinding, even when your heart was bleeding out. He ignored them all. Tonight, he just wanted to disappear into the amber glow of his study's fireplace and forget that he was the man who had destroyed his daughter's future. "Take me home, Rodriguez," he called to his longtime driver, his voice barely audible over the storm's symphony. "Yes, sir," came the familiar response from the front seat. But as the car turned onto East 78th Street, Michael felt something shift in the air around him. A presence. A warmth that didn't belong in the climate-controlled luxury of his vehicle. His skin prickled with an inexplicable chill, the kind his Irish grandmother used to say meant someone was walking over your grave. That's when he heard it, a breath, soft, shallow, and definitely not his own. Michael's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird, desperate for escape. There, huddled in the corner of his back seat like a broken sparrow, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old, maybe 11. Her clothes, a tattered Disney princess t-shirt and jeans with holes that definitely weren't fashionable, was soaked through, clinging to her tiny frame like a second skin. Her bare feet were dirty and cut, her dark hair hanging in wet tangles around a face that belonged in a Renaissance painting. But it was her eyes that stopped Michael's world from spinning. They were the color of winter sky, pale blue, almost gray, and they held a depth of knowledge that no child should possess. As their gazes met, Michael felt as though she could see straight through to his soul, reading every secret, every shame, every desperate prayer he'd whispered into the darkness. "I can make your daughter walk again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet it cut through the storm's roar with crystalline clarity. Michael's mouth fell open. No sound emerged. His rational mind, the mind that had built an empire through calculated risks and cold logic, screamed that this was impossible. His car was bulletproof, alarmed, locked. Rodriguez had checked it personally before picking him up. There was no way this child could have... "But you'll have to choose," the girl continued, her ethereal voice threading through his thoughts like smoke. "Between her and me," the words hit Michael like a physical blow. His chest constricted, making it impossible to breathe. The familiar scent of expensive leather was suddenly overwhelmed by something else, something that reminded him of rain on fresh earth, of his mother's garden when he was young, of innocence he'd lost somewhere along the way to the top. "Rodriguez," Michael's voice cracked like a teenager's, "stop the car." But the driver's hands remained steady on the wheel, his eyes fixed forward as if he hadn't heard, as if the girl wasn't there at all. Michael turned back to the impossible child, his hands trembling like leaves in autumn wind. How did you..." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with those ancient eyes. "Your Lily wears a yellow blanket when she sits in her wheelchair," the girl said softly. "It has dancing bears on it. She got it when she was 7 from your wife before she died. Lily holds it every night and cries into the soft fabric, wishing she could dance just once more." The air left Michael's lungs in a rush. Those details, intimate, private moments he'd witnessed through Lily's slightly open bedroom door, were known only to him and his daughter. Not even their housekeeper knew about the yellow blanket with dancing bears, the one Sarah had given Lily during her final stay at Sloan Kettering. "Lily dreams about the accident every night," the girl continued, each word driving deeper into Michael's already shattered heart. "She dreams about the moment the scaffolding fell, about how she tried to run but wasn't fast enough. She dreams about screaming your name, but you were in a meeting about profit margins and quarterly projections. You never heard her call for you." Tears Michael didn't know he was capable of shedding began streaming down his face. The child's words painted a picture of his daughter's private hell, a suffering he'd been too consumed with guilt to truly comprehend. "Stop," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, just stop." But she wasn't finished. "She forgives you, you know. Every morning when you bring her breakfast on the silver tray, the one with the roses that belong to your mother, she wants to tell you it's not your fault. But she can see the ghost of yourself you've become, and she's afraid that if she takes away your guilt, you'll disappear completely." Michael doubled over as if he'd been punched in the stomach. The accuracy of her observations was beyond coincidence, beyond explanation. This child, this impossible, mysterious child, knew things about his family that would be impossible for anyone to know. "What do you want from me?" he gasped. The girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a tarnished silver locket shaped like a heart. It looked ancient, as if it had been passed down through generations, worn smooth by countless hands seeking comfort in its weight. "I want to give you a choice," she said, extending the locket toward him. "Take this, and your daughter will walk again. But everything has a price, Mr. Donovan, and the cost of miracles is always higher than you think you can afford." Michael stared at the locket, his businessman's instincts warring with a father's desperate love. This was insane. Children didn't appear in locked cars. They didn't know impossible details about his private life. They didn't offer magical solutions to medical impossibilities. But as he looked at this ethereal child with her knowing eyes and otherworldly presence, Michael felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Dangerous, irrational, soul-consuming hope. The locket seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, warm against the child's palm. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the car, time felt suspended, as if the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for his decision. "Take it," the girl whispered, and in her voice, Michael heard echoes of every prayer he'd ever uttered, every bargain he'd tried to make with a God he'd forgotten how to believe in. "Take it and learn what it truly costs to be a father." Michael's hand trembled as it moved toward the locket, crossing the space between skepticism and faith, between logic and love, between the man he had become and the father he desperately wanted to be. As his fingers made contact with the warm silver, he felt electricity shoot through his entire body. Not painful, but transformative, as if every cell was being rewritten with possibility. The last thing he saw before the world tilted sideways was the girl's smile, sad and knowing and infinitely old. And the last thing he heard was her voice, soft as falling snow. "The choice has been made. Mr. Donovan, now the real test begins." Michael's consciousness returned like waves crashing against a distant shore, slowly, then all at once. The familiar hum of the Bentley's engine filled his ears, but something was different. The storm had intensified, turning the night into a biblical deluge that made the windows look like they were underwater. His head throbbed with the intensity of a jackhammer, and his mouth tasted like copper pennies and regret. "Sir, Mr. Donovan?" Rodriguez's concerned voice cut through the fog in Michael's brain. "Are you all right back there? You've been quiet for the last 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Michael's eyes snapped open, his heart racing as he frantically searched the back seat. The rich leather was pristine, unmarked by any sign of a wet, desperate child. No muddy footprints on the floor mats, no damp spots where she had been sitting. Nothing but the lingering scent of rain and something else. Something that reminded him of his grandmother's attic, full of old photographs and forgotten dreams. "Stop the car," Michael commanded, his voice hoarse as if he'd been screaming. "Sir, I said stop the goddamn car." The words tore from his throat with such violence that Rodriguez immediately pulled over to the curb, the hazard lights casting an amber glow on the rain-soaked asphalt. Michael threw open the door and stumbled onto the sidewalk, his $1,000 Italian shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the neon signs of late-night delis and 24-hour laundromats. The rain immediately soaked through his custom-tailored suit, but he didn't care. He had to find her. He had to know if she was real or if his grief-addled mind had finally snapped under the pressure. "There!" he shouted, pointing at a figure hunched in the doorway of a closed flower shop across the street. "There she is." But as he ran toward the shape, dodging a taxi that honked angrily at his reckless sprint, Michael realized it was just a pile of garbage bags and discarded newspapers, made human by shadows and desperation. "Mr. Donovan!" Rodriguez had followed him, holding an umbrella that did nothing against the sideways rain. "Sir, please get back in the car. There's nobody here." Michael spun around, wild-eyed and soaking wet, scanning every doorway, every alley, every possible hiding place. She was there, Rodriguez, in the car. A little girl, maybe 10 years old, with blue eyes and... "Sir!" Rodriguez's voice was gentle but firm, the tone one might use with someone teetering on the edge of a nervous breakdown. "I've been driving you for 8 years. I checked the car myself before picking you up tonight. It's been locked the entire time. There's no way anyone could have gotten inside." The words hit Michael like physical blows, each one chipping away at his already fragile grip on reality. But then, his hand moved instinctively to his suit jacket pocket, and his fingers closed around something small, solid, and impossibly warm. The locket. With shaking hands, he pulled it out, and even in the dim streetlight it seemed to glow with its own inner fire. The silver was tarnished with age, etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and dance in his peripheral vision. When he opened it, a tiny photograph looked back at him, a woman with kind eyes and a familiar smile, though he was certain he'd never seen her before in his life. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered, crossing himself. Where did you get that? She gave it to me, Michael said, his voice barely audible over the storm. The girl, she said, his throat constricted as he remembered her impossible words. She said she could make Lily walk again. Rodriguez stared at him with the expression of a man watching his employer lose his mind in real time. Mr. Donovan, I think maybe we should call Dr. Peterson, or perhaps... No. Michael's voice cut through the night with newfound determination. Take me home, now. The ride back to the Upper East Side passed in tense silence, with Rodriguez stealing worried glances in the rearview mirror every few seconds. Michael clutched the locket so tightly that its edges cut into his palm, but he welcomed the pain. It proved that something had happened, that he wasn't completely losing his grip on reality. As they pulled up to his building, a pre-war masterpiece with limestone facades and gargoyles that seemed to watch the street with stone eyes, Michael felt his phone buzzing against his chest. A text from his night nurse, Mrs. Chen. Lily's having a difficult night. She's asking for you. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt eternal, each floor marker lighting up like a countdown to Judgment Day. Michael's reflection in the polished brass doors looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. His usually perfect silver hair hung in wet strands across his forehead. His eyes were wild and haunted, and his expensive suit clung to his frame like a burial shroud. The penthouse was tomb quiet, except for the soft hum of medical equipment and the gentle sound of rain against floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of Central Park. Mrs. Chen met him at the door, her face creased with concern. She's been restless all evening, she whispered. Keeps saying someone was calling her name. She won't take her medication until she sees you. Michael nodded, not trusting his voice, and made his way down the marble hallway to Lily's room. The door was slightly ajar, and soft light spilled out like liquid gold. He pushed it open gently and stepped inside. Lily was awake, propped up against a mountain of pillows. Her long auburn hair, so like her mother's, spread across the white cotton like spilled wine. The yellow blanket with dancing bears was clutched in her small hands, just as the mysterious girl had said. When she saw her father, her face lit up with a smile that could have powered Times Square. "Daddy," she said, her voice weak but filled with joy. "I was hoping you'd come. I had the strangest dream about a girl who said she knew you." Michael's blood turned to ice. What did she look like, sweetheart? She had the most beautiful blue eyes, Lily said, her own green eyes growing distant with memory. And she was holding something silver. She told me that everything was going to be okay, that you were going to make sure I could dance again. Isn't that silly? But Daddy, her voice dropped to a whisper. When I touched her hand in the dream, I felt something, like electricity. And for just a second, I swear I could feel my toes. The locket in Michael's pocket seemed to pulse with warmth, as if responding to his daughter's words. Outside, lightning illuminated the city in stark black and white, and thunder rolled across the sky like the footsteps of giants. Michael sat on the edge of Lily's bed, his hands trembling as he reached out to stroke her hair. "Lily," he said, his voice thick with emotion he could no longer contain. "What if I told you that dreams sometimes come true?" She looked at him with eyes that held too much wisdom for 17 years. "Then I'd say that some dreams are worth believing in, even if they seem impossible." As if summoned by her words, Michael felt the locket grow warmer still. And in that moment, sitting beside his broken daughter in their glass tower high above the city that never sleeps, he made a choice that would change everything. He was going to believe. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Michael's penthouse, casting long shadows across the Italian marble floors like prison bars. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep. The locket lay on his nightstand, catching the light and throwing tiny rainbows across the ceiling, as if it were made of more than mere silver and memories. Every few minutes he would reach for it, feeling its impossible warmth against his palm, wondering if he was losing his mind or finally finding his soul. Mrs. Chen had left an hour ago, her shift ending with whispered concerns about Lily's unusual night. The girl had slept deeper than she had in months, her face peaceful in a way that Michael hadn't seen since before the accident. But it was what she had said in her sleep that made his blood run cold. "She's coming back today, Daddy," the girl with the silver heart, at precisely 9:47 a.m., as Michael stood in his study nursing his third cup of coffee and staring at the morning joggers in Central Park below. His doorman's voice crackled through the intercom with barely contained bewilderment. "Mr. Donovan, there's a situation down here, sir. There's a young girl in the lobby. She says you're expecting her, but she's not on any list, and she's—" The man paused, clearly struggling with how to describe what he was seeing. "She's soaking wet, sir. From the rain." "But it's not raining." Michael's coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in an explosion of porcelain and dark liquid. His heart hammered against his ribs as he pressed the intercom button with a trembling finger. "Send her up," he whispered. "Now." The elevator's soft chime announced her arrival like a bell tolling the hour of reckoning. When the doors slid open, she stepped into his foyer like a ghost, materializing from another dimension. She looked exactly as she had the night before. The same tattered Disney princess shirt, the same jeans with holes that spoke of poverty rather than fashion, the same bare feet that left wet prints on his pristine marble floors despite the absence of rain outside. But in the clear light of morning, Michael could see details that the storm had hidden. There were dark circles under her otherworldly blue eyes, speaking of nights spent in doorways and park benches. Her dark hair, though clean, had been cut inexpertly, probably with dull scissors in some public restroom. Most heartbreaking of all were her hands, small and delicate, but scarred and calloused in ways that no child's hands should be. "Hello, Mr. Donovan," she said, her voice carrying that same ethereal quality that had haunted his sleepless night. "I told you everything has a price. Are you ready to learn what yours will be?" Before Michael could respond, Lily's voice rang out from down the hallway. "Daddy, is someone here?" "I thought I heard the elevator." The girl's face transformed at the sound, her ancient eyes filling with something that looked almost like joy. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "Her spirit shines so bright it hurts to look at sometimes. How do you know my daughter?" Michael's voice came out as a growl, every protective instinct screaming danger despite the child's apparent fragility. "The same way I know you," she replied cryptically. "The same way I know that Lily's favorite memory is dancing with her mother in the kitchen to Frank Sinatra's 'The Way You Look Tonight' when she was 12. The same way I know that you still have Sarah's wedding ring in a velvet box in your bedroom drawer, and you take it out every night to remember what love used to feel like." The words hit Michael like physical blows, each revelation another impossible truth that no stranger could know. "Stop," he breathed. "Please, just—" "Who are you?" But the girl was already moving toward Lily's room with the confidence of someone who belonged in this space, her bare feet silent on the marble. Michael followed, his legs weak with a mixture of terror and hope that threatened to consume him entirely. Lily was propped up in her hospital-style bed, her face lighting up like Christmas morning when she saw the mysterious child. "You're real!" she gasped. "You're the girl from my dream." "Dreams and reality aren't as different as people think," the girl said, approaching the bed with reverent care. "Sometimes the most important truths come to us when we're sleeping." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the locket, the same impossible locket that had spent the night burning against Michael's palm. But now, in the clear morning light, he could see details he had missed in the storm. The intricate engravings weren't just decorative patterns. They were tiny figures dancing, their poses so lifelike they seemed to move when viewed from different angles. "This belonged to someone very special," the girl said, her voice taking on the cadence of a bedtime story. "Someone who believed that love could conquer anything, even death, even despair, even the kind of mistakes that seemed too big to forgive." She held the locket out to Lily, who reached for it with trembling fingers. The moment their skin made contact, the room filled with a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, though every window was closed. Lily gasped, her green eyes widening as she stared down at her legs. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice full of wonder and terror. "Something's happening. My toes! I can feel my toes." Michael watched in stunned silence as his daughter's right foot, motionless for 3 months, twitched slightly under the white cotton sheet. It was barely perceptible, just the smallest movement of her big toe, but it might as well have been a mountain moving. "Oh my God," he breathed, sinking into the chair beside Lily's bed. "Oh my God, it's real. You're real." The girl nodded solemnly. "Magic is real, Mr. Donovan, but it's not free, and it's not simple. The locket can give your daughter back her legs, but the power comes from somewhere, from someone. And that someone..." She paused, her blue eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his soul ache. "That someone will have to pay the price." "What price?" Lily asked, still staring in amazement at her toe, which had moved twice more since touching the locket. The girl's expression grew grave, older than her years should allow. "The price of truth, Miss Lily. Your father will have to face the choices he made, the people he hurt, the secrets he buried so deep he forgot they were there." Michael felt the world tilting sideways as memories he'd spent years suppressing began clawing their way to the surface. The construction shortcuts to maximize profits, the safety inspections he'd bribed officials to overlook, the workers who'd been injured or worse because of his decisions, the families he'd paid off to keep their stories out of the newspapers. "Everything," the girl continued, her voice as inexorable as gravity, "has a price. Your daughter can walk again, Mr. Donovan, but first, you'll have to learn to live with the weight of who you really are." Outside, clouds were gathering despite the morning's clear skies, as if the very atmosphere was responding to the gravity of the moment. In her bed, Lily clutched the locket and watched her father's face crumble as he began to understand what salvation would cost. And in the space between miracle and judgment, between love and justice, a little girl who shouldn't exist waited patiently for a broken man to decide what kind of father he wanted to be. The girl had vanished as mysteriously as she had appeared, leaving only wet footprints that evaporated like morning dew, and the impossible warmth of the locket still clutched in Lily's trembling hands. Michael sat frozen in his leather chair, watching his daughter flex her toes with the wonder of someone discovering they had wings. Each tiny movement sent shockwaves through his carefully constructed world of logic and control. "Sophie," Lily whispered suddenly, her eyes distant and dreamy. "Her name is Sophie. She told you that?" Michael asked, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and adrenaline. "No," Lily replied, still staring at the locket. "I just know, the same way I know she's alone. The same way I know she's been waiting for us for a very long time." The name hit Michael like a sledgehammer to the chest. Sophie. Why did that name feel like a key, turning in a lock he'd welded shut years ago? He stumbled to his feet, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained from the previous night's rain, and made his way to his study with the desperation of a drowning man reaching for driftwood. His computer hummed to life with corporate efficiency, the multiple monitors displaying stock prices, weather reports, and email notifications that seemed suddenly trivial in the face of miracles and mysteries. With shaking fingers, Michael accessed the employee database for Donovan Development Group. 15 years of records, thousands of names, countless lives that had intersected with his empire. He typed Sophie into the search bar and held his breath. 3 results. Sophie Martinez, a secretary who'd worked in accounting for 6 months in 2018. Sophie Kim, a civil engineer who'd transferred to the Seattle office. And then, buried in the archives like a ghost from his corporate past, Sophie Chen, custodial staff, Brooklyn office, employed from March 2019 to November 2019. Michael clicked on her file with the reverence of someone opening a sacred text. A photograph filled his screen, a woman in her early 30s, with kind eyes and a weary smile, wearing the blue uniform of the cleaning crew. But it was the child beside her in the employee emergency contact photo that made Michael's blood turn to ice water. A little girl with impossibly blue eyes and dark hair, staring at the camera with an expression far too serious for her age. The resemblance to the mysterious child in his penthouse was undeniable, though this photo was clearly several years old. Daughter Sophie Chen Jr., age 7, the file read. Emergency contact information, Brooklyn Children's Services, caseworker Maria Santos. Michael's hands trembled as he scrolled through the employment record. Sophie Chen Sr. had been a model employee, always on time, never complained, worked double shifts when asked. The notes from her supervisor painted a picture of a woman desperate to provide for her child, accepting every extra hour, every thankless task, every humiliation with quiet dignity. But it was the final entry that made Michael's world implode. Employment terminated November 15, 2019 due to workplace accident. Compensation claim denied. Legal action pending. November 15, 2019. The date burned itself into Michael's retinas like a brand. He remembered that day with crystalline clarity. The day he'd been in the Cayman Islands, celebrating the completion of the Williamsburg Tower project. The day he'd raised a glass of champagne worth more than most people made in a week, toasting another successful corner cut, another safety regulation creatively interpreted. The day Sophie Chen had died. With the desperation of a man trying to outrun his own shadow, Michael dove deeper into the digital archives. Security footage, incident reports, insurance claims. All the bureaucratic detritus of a life extinguished in service to his profit margins. The video was grainy, timestamp reading 11:47 p.m. Sophie Chen, working alone on the 32nd floor, her small frame dwarfed by the industrial cleaning equipment. She was mopping near the windows when the scaffolding outside began to buckle. Scaffolding that should have been inspected. Should have been reinforced, should have been replaced months earlier if Michael hadn't been so focused on keeping costs down. The impact was swift and merciless. Glass exploded inward, metal twisted like angry fingers, and Sophie Chen was gone before she could even scream. Michael's stomach emptied itself violently into his antique wastebasket as the full weight of his sins crashed down upon him. The same type of scaffolding failure. The same corner cutting that had prioritized profits over human lives. The same willful negligence that had taken a mother from her child and 3 months ago had crippled his own daughter in cosmic retribution. But the horror wasn't finished with him yet. With shaking fingers, he accessed the legal files, the insurance claims, the depositions. The story they told was one of corporate machinery grinding up the innocent and spitting out settlements designed to bury truth beneath legal fees and non-disclosure agreements. Sophie Chen Jr., 7 years old, orphaned, abandoned, had been placed in the foster care system when no relatives could be found. Bounced from home to home, she'd run away from her most recent placement 3 weeks ago. The Amber Alert had been cancelled after 48 hours due to lack of leads. 3 weeks ago, right around the time Michael had started having nightmares about scaffolding and screaming children. His phone rang, the sound cutting through his anguish like a knife. Unknown number, but something compelled him to answer. "Hello, Mr. Donovan." The voice was familiar. Detective Maria Santos from the NYPD's Missing Persons Unit. They'd spoken briefly after Lily's accident, part of the routine investigation. "I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I need to ask you something strange." "What is it?" Michael managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've had reports of a missing child, Sophie Chen, age 10, being spotted near your building. Multiple witnesses saw her entering and leaving. Given your connection to her mother's case, I thought you should know." The words hit Michael like bullets. "Connection?" "The lawsuit, Mr. Donovan. Sophie Chen Sr.'s death at your construction site. Your company's lawyers have been fighting her daughter's claim for almost 4 years now. Surely you remember." But Michael hadn't remembered. He'd insulated himself so thoroughly from the human cost of his business practices that individual tragedies had become mere line items in legal budgets. Sophie Chen had been a number, a risk assessment, A problem to be managed rather than a woman who'd bled out on his 32nd floor while he celebrated another successful project. "Mr. Donovan, are you there?" "Yes," he whispered. "I'm here. The girl, Sophie Jr. She's been living on the streets since running away from her foster home. Social services think she might be trying to contact you. Has she made any attempts to reach out?" Michael looked through his study doorway toward Lily's room, where the impossible locket continued to work its miracle. In his mind, he could see those ancient blue eyes, so much like her mother's in the employee photo, filled with a forgiveness he didn't deserve and a power he couldn't understand. "No," he lied, the word tasting like ashes. "I haven't heard from her." But as he hung up the phone, Michael knew with absolute certainty that Sophie Chen, both mother and daughter, weren't finished with him yet. The price for miracles, he was beginning to understand, wasn't paid in money or power or influence. It was paid in truth, and the truth was going to destroy everything he'd built on lies. That night, Lily's dreams were different. They came in waves of color and sound that seemed to bleed through the walls of sleep into the waking world. Michael sat vigil in the chair beside her bed, watching her face contort with emotions that belonged to someone else's memories, listening to her whisper names she'd never heard before. "Mama," she breathed, her voice taking on an accent that sounded like Brooklyn tenements and late-night subway rides. "Mama, don't leave me here. Please don't leave me." Michael's blood chilled as he recognized that this wasn't Lily's voice, not entirely. The cadence was wrong, the pain too old, too deep for a 17-year-old who'd been loved and cherished her entire life. This was the voice of abandonment, of foster homes and social workers, and the kind of loneliness that carved holes in children's souls. In her sleep, Lily's hand clutched the locket so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Every few minutes, her legs would spasm slightly under the covers, not with the violent seizures that had plagued her after the accident, but with something that looked almost like walking, as if she were chasing someone through the labyrinth of her unconscious mind. At 3:17 a.m., she sat bolt upright with a gasp that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. Her green eyes were wide and unfocused, but tears streamed down her cheeks with the intensity of a summer storm. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice raw with grief that wasn't entirely her own. "She's so scared. Sophie's so scared, and she can't find her way home." Michael leaned forward, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What did you see, sweetheart?" "I saw her mother," Lily said, her words coming in broken fragments between sobs. "I saw Sophie's mama working in a big building with windows that touched the sky. She was cleaning the floors, and she was singing this old song about dancing under the stars. And she was thinking about her little girl at home, wondering if she remembered to eat dinner, if she did her homework, if she was safe." The description hit Michael like a physical blow. The 32nd floor of the Williamsburg Tower had floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the Brooklyn skyline. He could picture Sophie Chen Sr. there, alone in the vastness of corporate excess, singing to keep herself company while she scrubbed away the evidence of his empire's daily sins. "And then?" Michael asked, though part of him already knew the answer would destroy what was left of his soul. "And then everything fell apart," Lily continued, her voice growing smaller with each word. "The sky broke and the stars fell down, and Sophie's mama was gone, just gone, and little Sophie was waiting at home. But her mama never came back." Lily's hand moved unconsciously to her legs, rubbing the muscles that had been dead for 3 months, but now tingled with impossible life. "She's been waiting ever since, Daddy. Waiting and watching and trying to understand why God would take away the only person who ever loved her." Michael felt tears he didn't know he was capable of shedding streaming down his face. "Lily, She knows about you," his daughter interrupted, her voice taking on that otherworldly quality he'd heard from the mysterious child. "She knows about the shortcuts you took, the inspections you avoided, the safety regulations you ignored. She knows that her mama died because you chose money over lives." The words should have been an accusation, But they came out as a statement of fact, delivered with the same gentle sadness that had characterized all of Sophie's interactions with him. Even in his daughter's dreams, the child wasn't seeking revenge. She was seeking understanding. "But she doesn't hate you," Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. "That's what's so strange about it all. She should hate you. She should want to destroy you the way you destroyed her world. But instead she's trying to save you. Save me from what? From becoming what she is," Lily said, her green eyes focusing on him with laser intensity. "An orphan. She knows that if you don't face what you've done, if you don't make it right, you'll lose me too. Not to an accident this time, but to the poison that's eating you from the inside out." As if summoned by her words, the scent that had haunted Michael's car and penthouse returned. Rain on earth, innocence lost, and something else. Something that smelled like the perfume his wife Sarah used to wear. Chanel No. 5, delicate and timeless. A fragrance he'd had removed from every room in the penthouse because the memory was too painful to bear. "Do you smell that?" he whispered. Lily nodded, her eyes widening. "She's here." Not Sophie, the other one, the woman from the locket. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant, and Michael's breath began to fog in the suddenly Arctic air. The medical equipment monitoring Lily's vital signs began to beep erratically, as if responding to the presence of something that shouldn't exist in the world of machines and science. And then, impossibly, Michael heard it. Sarah's voice soft as a lullaby, singing the same song Lily had described from her dream. "Dancing under stars so bright, holding you throughout the night. Nothing in this world can part. The love that binds heart to heart." It was the song she'd sung to Lily when nightmares plagued her childhood. The same melody that had drifted through their kitchen during those perfect Sunday mornings when they danced around the breakfast table like teenagers in love. But Sarah had been dead for 5 years, claimed by cancer that had devoured her from the inside out, while Michael worked 18-hour days building an empire he thought would keep them safe forever. "She's been trying to reach you," Lily said, her voice barely audible over the ghostly melody. "Mama's been trying to tell you that Sophie isn't your enemy. She's your salvation." The singing stopped abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete that Michael could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the walls. But the scent of Chanel No. 5 lingered, mixing with rain and earth and the indefinable essence of miracles that defied explanation. "The locket," Lily whispered, opening her palm to reveal the silver heart glowing with its own inner light. "It's not just about making me walk again, is it? It's about making you remember how to be human." As she spoke, Michael felt something shift inside his chest. Not physical, but spiritual, as if chains he'd been carrying for years were finally beginning to loosen. The weight of guilt, of willful blindness, of choosing profit over people was still there. But for the first time since Sophie Chen Sr.'s death, he could imagine a world where redemption might be possible. Outside, dawn was breaking over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of hope and possibility. And in that moment, sitting beside his daughter, who was learning to feel her legs again, Michael Donovan began to understand that some debts could only be paid with truth, and some miracles could only be earned through the courage to face the monsters you'd created. 3 days had passed since the night of whispered dreams and ghostly perfume, and Michael's penthouse had become a prison of anticipation. Lily's progress was undeniable. She could now flex both feet, wiggle all her toes, and yesterday had managed to bend her knee slightly. The doctors at Mount Sinai were calling it unprecedented neurological recovery, scrambling to understand how spinal cord damage they deemed irreversible was somehow healing itself. But Michael knew the truth wasn't medical. It was moral, and the reckoning was coming. Sophie appeared on Thursday evening, materializing in his dining room like smoke given form. Michael had been expecting her. The locket had grown warm against Lily's palm all afternoon, pulsing with an urgency that spoke of unfinished business. This time she wasn't soaked from phantom rain. Instead, she wore a simple white dress that seemed to glow in the candlelight of Michael's formal dining room. her dark hair clean and braided with wildflowers that smelled like summer meadows. She looked older somehow, as if the weight of truth had aged her beyond her 10 years. But her eyes, those impossible blue eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ancient souls, burned with a determination that made Michael's blood run cold. "It's time," she said simply, taking a seat at the mahogany table that had hosted senators and CEOs, her small frame dwarfed by the high-backed chair that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Michael's hands trembled as he joined her, the crystal glasses and silver cutlery reflecting his haggard face back at him in fractured pieces. He'd lost 20 pounds in 3 days, his custom suits hanging loose on his frame like expensive shrouds. Sleep had become a stranger, food had lost all taste, and every mirror seemed to show him the face of a man gradually dissolving under the weight of his own sins. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice hoarse from days of crying he'd hidden from Lily and the nursing staff. Sophie's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained steady as stone. "The same thing every child wants from their parents, Mr. Donovan, the truth." "I'm not your father," Michael said weakly, though the words felt like lies even as they left his mouth. "Aren't you?" Sophie tilted her head, studying him with those ancient eyes. "You took my mother from me as surely as if you'd pushed her off that scaffolding yourself. You created the circumstances that killed her. You ignored the safety warnings that could have saved her life. In every way that matters, you're responsible for the fact that I've spent the last 4 years sleeping in doorways and eating from garbage cans." The accusations hit Michael like physical blows, each word driving deeper into his already shattered psyche. But what broke him completely was the lack of anger in her voice. She spoke of her suffering with the matter-of-fact tone of someone reciting a grocery list, as if her pain was simply another fact of existence to be catalogued and stored. "Your company's lawyers have been fighting my legal claim for 4 years, she continued, her small hands folded neatly on the table. 4 years of appeals and delays and procedural maneuvers designed to wear down a grieving child who had no one to advocate for her. They told the courts I was too young to understand the complexities of corporate liability. They claimed my mother was negligent, that she should have known the scaffolding was unsafe." Michael felt bile rising in his throat. He remembered now, vaguely, like a nightmare half forgotten upon waking, the briefings from his legal team about the Chen situation. They'd presented it as a simple cost-benefit analysis. Fighting the claim would cost less in legal fees than setting a precedent of accepting responsibility for workplace accidents. "She was working 3 jobs to pay for my asthma medication," Sophie said, her voice growing quieter with each word. "The late shift at your building, early morning cleaning at a hospital in Queens, and weekends at a laundromat in Chinatown. 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, all so I could breathe without my lungs feeling like they were full of glass." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph, placing it gently on the table between them. It showed a woman, Sophie Chen Sr., holding a younger version of the mysterious child, both of them laughing at something off camera. The woman looked exhausted, but radiant, her love for her daughter shining through the weariness like sunlight through storm clouds. "She used to tell me stories while she worked," Sophie continued, tracing her mother's face with one small finger. "Stories about a better life, about the day when she'd saved enough money for us to move somewhere safe, somewhere I could play outside without worrying about needles and broken glass. She had it all planned out. A little apartment in Queens with a window box for herbs, maybe even a small yard where she could plant the tomatoes her grandmother grew back in China." Michael's tears fell freely now, splashing onto the expensive table like accusations made liquid. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," Sophie interrupted, her voice cutting through his protestations like a blade through silk. "That's what's so much worse than ignorance, Mr. Donovan. You had the information. The safety inspectors filed 17 separate reports about the scaffolding system at the Williamsburg Tower. 17 warnings that the support brackets were corroding, that the weather exposure was compromising structural integrity, knew that someone was going to get hurt. She pulled out another document, a copy of one of those inspection reports. Its urgent red stamps and bold warning text mocking him from across the table. Your construction manager recommended immediate replacement. Your insurance company threatened to cancel your coverage if the issues weren't addressed. Even your own workers filed complaints about the dangerous conditions. Michael stared at the report, his vision blurring as the magnitude of his willful negligence crashed over him like a tidal wave. He remembered the meeting where they discussed the scaffolding costs, $2.3 million to replace the system, versus the minimal risk of an accident that could probably be settled for less. Risk assessment, cost-benefit analysis, acceptable losses. Those were the terms his team had used to describe the possibility of human death, as if Sophie's mother had been nothing more than a line item in a corporate spreadsheet. "But you chose profits over people," Sophie said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. "You gambled with my mother's life and lost. And when the inevitable happened, you used your lawyers and your money and your influence to make sure the truth never saw daylight." "What do you want me to do?" Michael whispered, his voice broken beyond repair. "Tell me what you want and I'll do it, anything, everything." Sophie's expression softened slightly, and for a moment she looked like what she truly was, a lost, grieving child who had been forced to grow up too fast in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. "I want my mother back," she said simply. "I want to smell her perfume when she comes home from work. I want to hear her singing while she makes dinner. I want to feel safe again, the way children are supposed to feel when someone loves them unconditionally." She paused, her ancient eyes filling with tears that she didn't let fall. "But since you can't give me that," she continued, "I want the next best thing. I want you to tell the world what you did. I want you to stand up in front of cameras and microphones and tell everyone how Sophie Chen died, and why, and what you're going to do to make sure it never happens again." The request hit Michael like a sledgehammer to the chest. Going public would destroy everything, his company, his reputation, his carefully constructed image as a pillar of New York society. The lawsuits alone would bankrupt him, and the criminal charges would likely put him in prison for the rest of his life. But as he looked at this ethereal child who held his daughter's future in her small hands, Michael realized that some prices were worth paying. Some debts could only be settled with the complete destruction of everything you'd built on lies. "And if I do this," he asked quietly, "if I confess everything, you'll make sure Lily can walk again?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "Truth has its own power, Mr. Donovan. When you stop running from what you've done, when you face the consequences of your choices, the healing can begin. For both of you." Outside, thunder rumbled across Manhattan like the footsteps of approaching judgment, and Michael Donovan began to understand that salvation always came with a price that would cost him everything he thought he valued. Not the frustrated cries of a teenager dealing with disability, not the medical distress that had punctuated their nights since the accident. This was something primal, something that reached into his chest and squeezed his heart until he couldn't breathe. He bolted upright in his Egyptian cotton sheets, his body already moving before his mind could process what was happening. The hallway stretched before him like a tunnel of horror, the marble floors cold against his bare feet as he ran toward Lily's room. Her screams continued, raw and desperate, echoing off the high ceilings of his penthouse like the wails of the damned. But underneath her voice, he could hear something else, whispers in a language he didn't recognize, chanting that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He burst through her bedroom door to find his daughter convulsing in her hospital bed, her back arched at an impossible angle, her hands clawing at the air as if she were trying to fight off invisible attackers. The locket lay on her nightstand, no longer glowing with warm light, but pulsing with something dark and malevolent, like a diseased heart beating in rhythm with unseen pain. "Lily!" Michael reached for her, but the moment his fingers touched her skin, he was thrown backward by an invisible force that sent him crashing into the wall. The impact knocked the breath from his lungs and sent stars dancing across his vision, but he struggled to his feet, desperate to reach his daughter. Her screams had transformed into words, but they weren't coming from her throat. They were coming from somewhere deeper, as if another voice was using her vocal cords like a ventriloquist's dummy. "She's burning." The voice was high and terrified, carrying the accent of Brooklyn tenements and immigrant dreams. "The building's on fire and she can't get out. Mama's trapped and nobody's coming to save her." Michael's blood turned to ice as he recognized the voice. It was Sophie, not the mystical child who'd been visiting them, but the 7-year-old version from 4 years ago, the night her mother died. "Sophie!" he called out, his voice breaking with panic. "Sophie, can you hear me?" But Lily's body continued to convulse. Her green eyes rolled back until only the whites showed, her mouth moving with words that belonged to another time, another tragedy. "The stairs are blocked." The child's voice shrieked through Lily's throat. "The elevator's not working!" She's calling for help, but nobody can hear her because the windows are so high up, because rich people like to live above the clouds, where poor people's voices can't reach them. Each word was a dagger to Michael's heart, painting a picture of Sophie Chen Sr.'s final moments that was far worse than he had imagined. The official report had said she died instantly from the scaffolding collapse. But the voice speaking through his daughter told a different story, one of fire and smoke and desperate attempts to escape a building that had become a tomb. "She's thinking about me," the voice continued, growing weaker and more desperate. "About how I'll be alone now. About how she promised we'd have breakfast at McDonald's tomorrow because it's Saturday and she gets paid on Fridays. About how she was going to buy me new shoes because mine have holes and my socks get wet when it rains." Michael felt his legs give out beneath him, and he collapsed to his knees beside Lily's bed. The weight of what he had done, what his greed and negligence had cost, was crushing him like the collapsing scaffolding that had killed Sophie's mother. "I'm sorry." He screamed into the supernatural storm that had consumed his daughter. "I'm sorry, Sophie. I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry I killed your mother." But the confession seemed to make things worse. Lily's convulsions intensified, and the temperature in the room plummeted until Michael could see his breath fogging in the air. The medical monitors attached to his daughter began sparking and smoking, their screens flickering with images that looked like security camera footage from the night of the accident. Through Lily's eyes, Michael could see the Williamsburg Tower as it had been 4 years ago. Sophie Chen Sr. moving through the darkened offices with her cleaning cart, humming the same song about dancing under stars that Sarah used to sing. She looked so young in the grainy footage, so full of hope despite the exhaustion that lined her face. And then the building began to shake. Not from an earthquake or any natural disaster, but from the systemic failure of safety systems that Michael had refused to maintain. The scaffolding outside started to buckle and twist, its corroded support brackets finally giving way under years of neglect and corner cutting. But instead of the quick death the reports had described, Michael saw the horrible truth. The falling debris had damaged the building's electrical system, sparking fires on multiple floors. Sophie Chen Sr. hadn't died from the impact. She had been trapped in a burning building, calling for help that would never come because Michael Donovan had been too cheap to install adequate safety systems. "She climbed 32 flights of stairs," the child's voice whispered through Lily's lips, growing fainter with each word. 32 flights, with smoke filling her lungs and flames chasing her up the stairwell. She made it to the roof, but the door was locked, another safety regulation you ignored to save money on emergency access systems. The image in Lily's eyes shifted to the building's rooftop, where a small figure stood silhouetted against the orange glow of flames below. Sophie Chen Sr. had her cell phone in her hand, trying to call for help, trying to reach someone who might care that a poor immigrant woman was about to die alone and forgotten. "The last number she dialed was yours," the voice said, and Michael felt his world shatter completely. "She called your emergency line because she thought you should know what was happening to your building. She thought you might send help." Michael remembered that night with sickening clarity. He had been at a charity gala in the Caymans, surrounded by other wealthy men celebrating their latest tax avoidance schemes. His phone had rung once, a number he didn't recognize, but he had ignored it to focus on a conversation about offshore investments. He had literally ignored Sophie Chen's dying call for help so he could discuss ways to hide money from the government. "But you were too busy counting your money to answer," the child's voice continued, each word driving Michael deeper into the abyss of his own guilt. "So she died alone on that rooftop, watching the city lights twinkle below her like the stars she used to sing about. Thinking about the little girl who would wake up tomorrow morning and wait for a mama who would never come home." As the supernatural storm reached its crescendo, Lily's body went completely rigid. Her back arched so severely that Michael feared her spine would snap. The locket on her nightstand cracked down the middle with a sound like breaking bones, and suddenly the room fell silent. No more screaming, no more whispers, no more ghostly voices or supernatural phenomena, just the quiet hum of broken medical equipment and his daughter's shallow breathing. But when Lily opened her eyes, they weren't green anymore. They were the pale blue of winter skies, ancient and knowing, and filled with a sadness that no child should carry. "Sophie?" Michael whispered. The child wearing his daughter's face nodded slowly. "She's gone, Mr. Donovan. Lily's gone. The miracle was only borrowed time, and time always comes with interest." Michael's heart stopped beating. "What do you mean she's gone?" "I mean you waited too long to choose," Sophie said through Lily's lips, her voice carrying the weight of cosmic judgment. "I offered you a chance to save your daughter through truth, but you chose fear instead. You chose your reputation over her recovery, your pride over her future. And now..." She struggled to sit up, her movements weak and unsteady. "Now she's trapped in the same place my mother died, between this world and whatever comes next. And the only way to bring her back is to give up everything you've built on lies." Outside, dawn was breaking over Manhattan, but it looked different now, muted, colorless, as if the sun itself was mourning the choice Michael had failed to make. The morning sun painted Manhattan in shades of gold and redemption as Michael Donovan stood before the marble steps of City Hall, his hands trembling as he gripped a manila folder containing the documents that would destroy his empire and save his soul. Behind him, a small army of reporters jostled for position, their cameras and microphones trained on the man who had called an emergency press conference with less than 2 hours' notice. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain, but also something else, something that smelled like wildflowers and hope. Michael knew Sophie was near, though he couldn't see her in the crowd of journalists and curious onlookers who had gathered to witness what many assumed would be another corporate PR stunt. But this wasn't about public relations or damage control. This was about a father's love and a debt that could only be paid with complete destruction. Michael stepped up to the podium, his legs weak beneath him, as if he were walking to his own execution. The microphones amplified his breathing, turning his nervous exhales into a symphony of anticipation that echoed off the government building's limestone facade. Every major news outlet was represented: CNN, Fox, NBC, The Times, The Post, their reporters scribbling notes and checking their recording equipment with the hungry efficiency of sharks scenting blood in the water. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael began, his voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. "My name is Michael Donovan, CEO of Donovan Development Group. I called you here today to tell you about a woman named Sophie Chen." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Sophie Chen wasn't a household name, wasn't a celebrity or politician or anyone the general public would recognize. But Michael could see the recognition dawning in a few faces. Investigative reporters who had covered workplace accidents, legal correspondents who had tracked corporate liability cases. 4 years ago, Michael continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, Sophie Chen died in one of my buildings. The official report called it an accident. The insurance companies labeled it an act of God. My lawyers described it as an unfortunate incident involving faulty third-party equipment. His hands shook as he opened the manila folder, revealing copies of the safety inspection reports he had ignored, the maintenance requests he had denied, the worker complaints he had buried beneath legal technicalities and corporate doublespeak. "They were all lies," he said, his voice carrying across the plaza like a confession heard in cathedral silence. "Sophie Chen died because I chose profit margins over human lives. She died because I cut corners, ignored safety regulations, and prioritized shareholder returns over worker protection." The crowd erupted into a cacophony of shouted questions and clicking cameras, but Michael raised his hand for silence. There was more, so much more, and he needed them to hear it all. The scaffolding system that collapsed and started the fire that killed her had been flagged as dangerous 17 separate times, he continued, holding up the inspection reports like evidence in a cosmic courtroom. "My construction managers recommended immediate replacement. My insurance company threatened to cancel coverage. Even my own workers filed formal complaints about the hazardous conditions. A reporter from the Times shouted a question about liability, but Michael ignored her. This wasn't about legal consequences anymore. This was about moral reckoning. I received those reports, read those recommendations, and chose to do nothing because replacing the scaffolding system would have cost me $2.3 million in profits," Michael said, each word cutting into his throat like broken glass. "I performed a cost-benefit analysis that weighed Sophie Chen's life against my quarterly earnings. And I chose money. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the hardened journalists who had covered wars and political scandals seemed stunned by the naked brutality of his confession." In the back of the crowd, Michael caught a glimpse of pale blue eyes watching him with something that might have been approval. "But that's not the worst part," Michael continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, forcing the crowd to lean forward to catch every word. "The worst part is what happened after she died." He pulled out another set of documents, legal briefs, settlement offers, court motions designed to delay and obfuscate and ultimately deny justice to a grieving child. Sophie Chen left behind a 10-year-old daughter, also named Sophie, who spent 4 years fighting my legal team for compensation. 4 years of appeals and procedural delays and character assassinations designed to break the spirit of an orphaned child who had lost everything. Michael's voice broke completely as he thought about the little girl who had appeared in his car that rainy night, soaking wet and desperate, carrying the weight of cosmic justice in her ancient eyes. "We told the courts she was too young to understand the complexities of corporate liability. We claimed her mother was negligent, that she should have known better than to trust the safety of a building owned by Donovan Development Group. We spent more money fighting her legal claim than it would have cost to fix the scaffolding system that killed her mother in the first place." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word of a confession that was rewriting the rules of corporate accountability in real time. Michael could see phone cameras recording, reporters typing frantically on their devices, the machinery of modern media capturing every moment of his professional suicide. "Today, I'm establishing the Sophie Chen Foundation with an initial donation of $400 million, Michael announced, his voice steady for the first time since stepping up to the podium. "Half of my personal net worth will go toward improving workplace safety standards and providing support for families affected by corporate negligence." But even as he spoke the words that would impoverish him, Michael felt something shifting in the world around him. The air grew warmer, the scent of wildflowers stronger, and in the distance he could hear something that sounded like children laughing. "I'm also immediately resigning as CEO of Donovan Development Group and turning over all company assets to an independent oversight board that will ensure full compliance with all safety regulations moving forward," he continued. "Every building project will be subject to third-party safety audits, and any violations will result in immediate project suspension, regardless of financial consequences." As the words left his mouth, Michael felt a presence beside him at the podium, not visible to the cameras, but real enough to touch his heart with warmth he hadn't felt since Sarah died. In his peripheral vision, he could see two figures, a woman in a cleaning uniform with kind eyes and a tired smile, and a little girl with blue eyes that held the wisdom of angels. "Sophie Chen Jr., if you're watching this," Michael said, speaking directly into the cameras with tears streaming down his face, "I want you to know that your mother was a hero. She worked 3 jobs to keep you healthy and safe. She died trying to do the right thing in a world that had failed to protect her. And you are the strongest, bravest person I have ever known." Behind the cameras, in a spot where shadows seemed to gather like pools of starlight, Michael saw the mysterious child who had changed his life forever. She was no longer wearing tattered clothes or carrying the weight of cosmic judgment. Instead, she looked like what she had always been beneath the supernatural circumstances. A little girl who had lost her mother and found the courage to forgive the man who had taken her away. She was holding hands with a woman who could only be Sophie Chen Sr., both of them glowing with a light that had nothing to do with photography equipment and everything to do with the power of truth finally set free. As Michael finished his confession and stepped away from the podium, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope of a man trying to bargain with fate, but the quiet, steady hope of someone who had finally chosen love over fear, truth over comfort, and redemption over reputation. The cameras kept rolling, the reporters kept shouting questions, but Michael was no longer listening to them. Instead, he was hearing something far more beautiful. The sound of his daughter's voice calling his name, clear and strong, and absolutely, impossibly alive. "Daddy!" Lily's voice cut through the chaos like sunlight through storm clouds. "Daddy, I'm walking." And as Michael turned toward the sound, he saw the most beautiful sight of his life. His daughter standing at the bottom of the City Hall steps, her legs steady beneath her, her face radiant with joy and disbelief, and the kind of miracle that could only be bought with complete surrender to truth. The crowd erupted into gasps and applause as they witnessed something that transcended corporate scandal and legal settlements. They were seeing love triumph over death, redemption conquer despair, and a father's sacrifice bring his daughter back from the edge of forever. Michael Donovan's journey from corporate titan to broken father teaches us that some prices are worth paying, no matter how much they cost us. In a world where we're constantly tempted to choose comfort over conscience, profit over people, and reputation over redemption, his story asks us the most difficult question of all. What would you sacrifice to save the person you love most? Would you have the courage to destroy everything you've built if it meant giving your child a second chance at life? Or would you, like Michael initially did, choose the safety of lies over the terrifying freedom of truth? The mysterious Sophie Chen represents something profound in all of us, the voice of conscience that we try to silence, the consequences of our actions that we try to forget, and the possibility of forgiveness that we believe we don't deserve. Her supernatural ability to heal Lily wasn't really magic at all. It was the transformative power of a father finally choosing love over fear. Sometimes the greatest miracles happen not when we gain something, but when we have the strength to let go of everything that's poisoning our souls. Michael's confession didn't just save his daughter's legs, it saved his own humanity. As you reflect on this story, ask yourself, what scaffolding in your own life needs to be rebuilt before it collapses and hurts someone you love? What truths are you avoiding because facing them would cost you everything you think you value? Remember, redemption is never about the size of your bank account or the height of your reputation. It's about the depth of your courage to do what's right, even when it destroys you in the process. If this story moved you, don't keep it to yourself. Hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose truth over comfort. Like this video if you believe in the power of second chances, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Michael's place?